It's 1:47 a.m. A conversation from 6 years ago is playing behind your closed eyes, just 11 seconds of it. The part where you laughed a beat too late. Your brain hits play again, frame by frame, like it's checking for something it missed the first 30 times. Most people would call this overthinking and move on. That's the easy label. But most people forget a conversation within hours. Ask them what was said at lunch 3 days ago, and you'll get a shrug. If yours keeps finding its way back at the worst possible hour, there's a real pattern underneath it, not a character flaw, and it's rarer than overthinking gives it credit for. Here are 5 things that tend to be true about people whose minds do this. 1. You catch what the room missed. Some people walk out of a conversation and remember the topic. You walk out remembering the topic, the tone underneath it, and the 3 seconds where the tone and the words briefly disagreed with each other. That flicker is the part most people walk right past without registering at all. While most people hear words and take them mostly at face value, some part of you is running a second track underneath. Tone. Timing. The half-second delay before someone agrees with you that means they don't actually agree at all. You clock the joke that landed a little too hard. The "I'm fine" that came out flatter than it should have. This isn't your imagination working overtime. It's closer to a radar that never fully powers down. For some people, that radar develops early, in places where reading a room accurately mattered, a house where a mood could shift without warning, where missing a signal cost something. Your brain adapted, and sometimes it keeps scanning, even now, in rooms that are perfectly safe. That's why a conversation can feel finished to everyone else at the table and still feel unfinished to you 3 hours later. Some detail is still waiting to be filed, and your mind won't move on until it is. You'll be halfway through making dinner and suddenly realize what that pause after your question really meant. A coworker says sure, whatever works, about a meeting time, and something in the flatness of it tells you they're annoyed, days before they admit it out loud, before they've even fully admitted it to themselves. And you have been right often enough that you stop dismissing it. Nobody taught you to notice this. You just do. 2. The feeling from the conversation outlasts the conversation itself. Someone makes an offhand comment, mildly sharp, and everyone else in the room has moved on to the next topic within seconds, already on to the next story. You haven't. Some part of your chest is still holding what that comment felt like an hour later, on the drive home, in the shower, right as you're trying to fall asleep. This isn't you being fragile. It's a documented difference in how deeply some nervous systems process emotional information. You don't just register that something happened. You metabolize the full weight of it, which simply takes longer to run its course. A single sentence that someone else forgot by dinner can sit with you for 3 days, not because you're choosing to dwell, but because your system needs more time to finish processing what it took in. You'll be standing in line at the grocery store, completely unrelated thought in your head, and the comment surfaces again, uninvited. It drags the same tightness in your chest back with it, like your body kept a small copy of the feeling on file and just handed it back to you without asking. That kind of thing is easy to apologize for, hard to explain, and stranger to have in common with people once you realize how many of us are quietly carrying it. 3. You don't remember the gist. You remember the transcript. Ask most people what someone said last week and you'll get the general idea, paraphrased, softened at the edges, half the specifics already gone. Ask you, and there's a real chance you can produce something close to the actual sentence. The specific word they chose, the pause before it, the way their voice dropped on the last 3 words. This kind of precise verbal memory is genuinely uncommon, and it's not something you're doing on purpose. It's just how your system stores language, not as a summary, but as something closer to a recording, which sounds useful, and often is, until the sentence stored word for word happens to be the one you wish you could unhear. Someone says something careless in passing. They forget it by the next sentence, already moved on to what they're having for dinner, and you're still carrying the exact wording of it 2 years later. You can recite it on command, complete with the tone it was said in and exactly where you were both standing when it happened, down to what the light looked like that day. They moved on because their brain filed it as unremarkable, one sentence among thousands that week. Yours filed it as data, tagged it as important for reasons it never explained to you. And data doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient to keep carrying around. If you've made it this far and you're recognizing more of yourself than you expected, drop Transcript in the comments. The next trait is the one that tends to hit hardest, so I'm curious who's still with me. For some part of you isn't replaying the moment. It's rehearsing who you wish you'd been. Here's the part that rarely gets said out loud, because it's a little uncomfortable to sit with, even privately. When you replay that 11-second clip, you're usually not trying to figure out what the other person thought. You're trying to become the version of you that landed the joke, held the eye contact, said the smart thing 4 seconds sooner. And because that moment already happened and can't be edited, some part of your mind keeps trying anyway. It runs the scene again, hoping this time it lands differently, even though it never will, no matter how many angles you replay it from. That's not analysis. That's rehearsal for a moment that already closed, for a room that already moved on. Notice, too, which conversations you replay the most. It's rarely the ones where you said something genuinely cruel or offensive. Those tend to get resolved, apologized for, put down, filed away with an ending attached. It's the small ones, a little too eager, a laugh that landed at the wrong beat, a sentence that came out clumsier than you meant it, a compliment you gave that sounded, on replay, slightly too much. Those tiny moments get replayed the hardest precisely because they're not really about the conversation. They're proof, or so it feels, of a gap between who you are and who you're trying to become. And some part of your mind is convinced that if it just studies the gap hard enough, examines it from one more angle, it'll finally close. It gets stranger. Each time you replay it, you're not actually accessing the original moment. Memory doesn't store events like a recording. It reconstructs them, and every time you pull one up, you're really replaying your last replay of it, not the event itself. The version you've rewatched 40 times has likely drifted, quietly, into something worse than what actually happened. The awkward pause a little longer. Their expression a little more judgmental. Your own voice a little more grating. Each pass adding a small edit you never consciously chose to make. The way a photocopy of a photocopy slowly loses detail until what's left barely resembles the original page. The person on the other end of that 6-year-old conversation almost certainly doesn't remember it happened at all. You're not defending yourself against their judgment. You're defending yourself against a version of the scene your own mind quietly rewrote to be worse than the night it actually happened. This is also where it's worth being honest about the difference between reflection and rumination, because they can look identical from the outside. Same posture, same furrowed brow, same late hour. Reflection picks something up, learns from it, and sets it back down. It has an ending. Rumination picks the same thing up, learns the same lesson for the 10th time, forgets it by morning, and picks it back up again. It doesn't end. It loops, and loops don't take you anywhere new no matter how many times you run them, no matter how thorough each pass feels while you're inside it. If you can't remember the last time a replay taught you something you didn't already know, that's usually the tell. You're in the second one, not the first, still hitting play at an hour nobody else is awake to witness. 5. Sometimes this isn't analysis. It's an old alarm still running. Here's the part worth being honest about, because these 5 traits can come from 2 different places, and the difference matters more than any single trait on this list. There's a way this shows up that's simply how a sharp, reflective mind works. It replays to genuinely learn, occasionally, briefly, before setting the moment down and moving on with the rest of the evening. That kind is tiring sometimes, but it isn't frightening. It doesn't come with a racing heart or a stomach that drops. You can think about that clip, notice what you do differently next time, and go make coffee, mildly annoyed with yourself. Nothing more, the way you'd shrug off a typo you caught after hitting send. And there's another way this shows up that's something else entirely. A nervous system that learned, at some point, that missing a signal wasn't safe. A caregiver's mood, a friend's silence, a partner's tone had to be tracked closely because something bad tended to follow when they weren't. And there was no adult around to catch what you missed. If that's closer to your experience, the replaying isn't really about that one conversation at all. It's an old alarm system, still scanning for danger in rooms that no longer contain any. Still asking, did I do something wrong? Long after the actual danger is gone, and the people who caused it are nowhere near you anymore. This version doesn't feel like mild annoyance over coffee. It feels like your chest tightening over a text that hasn't been answered in 20 minutes. Like rehearsing an apology for something you haven't even done yet. Like scanning a friend's one-word reply for evidence you did something wrong. Running the same threat assessment your body learned to run when the stakes were actually real, back when it had every reason to run it. Neither version means something is wrong with you, but only you can feel from the inside whether your replays feel like thinking or like flinching. If it's the first, here's one small, doable thing. The next time you catch a replay starting up, ask it one question. What am I trying to learn right now that I don't already know? If there's a real answer, follow it, briefly, then let it go on purpose, the way you'd close a tab instead of leaving it open in the background draining the battery all night. If the answer is nothing, that is your sign. You already extracted the lesson 3 replays ago, and you're just here again out of habit, running the same footage for no new reason. The loop has nothing left to teach you tonight. The kindest thing you can do is close it anyway, even without a tidy resolution, even without the satisfying click of a case actually closed. If it's the second, if the replaying feels less like reflection and more like your body bracing for something, pay attention. That is not a smaller problem to fix with a better mental trick. It's a nervous system that's been doing overtime for longer than it should have to. And it deserves the kind of support that can genuinely teach it the danger has passed, not just another video telling it to relax. You are not broken, and you're not imagining the weight of this. Your mind replays conversations because some part of it is still trying to protect you, still trying to help you belong, still trying to make sure you're safe in a world it's not fully convinced has stopped being dangerous. That effort deserves compassion, even when it's aimed at a moment that's long over and was never as damning as 1:47 a.m. made it feel. The version of you in that clip was doing the best they could with what they knew in that exact second. No rehearsal, no second take, no benefit of hindsight, no way of knowing than what you know now. Sitting here, still turning it over. That was enough then. It's allowed to be enough now, too. If any of these 5 sound like the inside of your head, that's worth a like on your way out. And send this to someone who keeps replaying conversations long after everyone else has forgotten them. If you want more of this, subscribing means the next one finds you instead of the other way around. Understanding the wiring rarely fixes everything by itself, but it's usually where the fixing starts, and it helps to know you're not the only one still awake, running the tape.